Well, as the ANC decides on the leaders who will be tasked to drive its goals of renewal and unity, steer it into richer electoral territory, help drive its economic and social policies, we take a closer look at the contenders. What are their track records, and have they done well and performed scandal-free in their roles? To discuss, we're joined by political analyst Professor Theo. Prof, good evening to you and welcome. So at this stage, it's anyone's game. We are expecting results over the next few hours, but let's take a closer look at this pool of talent the ANC is relying on to drive its agenda for itself and the country. And for the party, this ideally should represent the brains trust, the visionaries, the torchbearers for what happens next. How would you characterize what is now being presented to its members and its voters?
Well, most political parties are confronted with the situation that those leaders in political parties, and it goes beyond the ANC, we can go to other countries as well, those guys that actually make it to the top, they leave behind certain trademarks, and they leave behind certain issues and so on to get to the top. In our case, however, the amount of questions about dealings, corruption, possible corruption, alleged corruption, to the extent that in the Zondo report, I think the ANC was actually investigated rather than just the individuals. So in the leadership, that also came through to a certain extent.
Well, let's go back to the top then. We know the president has recently survived an impeachment process in Parliament, but his disappearance after that Section 89 report and the idea that he was widely consulting gave the impression, at least in some quarters, of a man who needed to step in and demonstrate leadership, take the nation into his confidence and show strength. He's up against Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who as Minister of Health had to resign amid allegations that he and his family benefited improperly from that well-publicized state contract. How are they measuring up?
Yeah, well, there we've got a very serious vulnerability at the highest national level, because it's possible that some of the other agencies investigating the president regarding Phala Phala may in 2023 come to a conclusion that may be negative to the president and that may eventually force him to consider stepping aside or resigning or whatever. And exactly the same applies to Zweli Mkhize. At the moment, he argues in public that he stepped aside on his own to allow for an investigation, which, of course, in the ANC's history, I know of only one man that did that, and that was Mr. Nene, that did the honorable thing to say, I've made a mistake, it's time for me to go. But for the rest, I don't see a Nene principle featuring. Zweli Mkhize resigned before he was pushed, and that case is also still hanging in the air. So even if he's elected president, it may come back to haunt him. So in both cases, we're actually very vulnerable.
Deputy President position then, Ronald Lamola, Paul Mashatile, Oscar Mabuyane. Mashatile taking hits for not managing the salary crisis at Luthuli House properly, and this is amongst other things. Oscar Mabuyane, you've seen reports from the Public Protector's Office over the alleged misuse of funds by the Eastern Cape government, among them monies from Winnie Madikizela Mandela's commemorative events, which saw hundreds of thousands of rands diverted to renovations at a home of his. Lamola, too, taking flack for the law firm he was affiliated to, allegedly bungling investigative reports into the National Lotteries Commission. So that continues. And then you have, Oscar Mabuyane in that as well. Your assessment on this crop of talent for this position?
Yeah, well, there you've got exactly the same issue. It's the question of vulnerability and the question of integrity. If one were to listen to the ANC as an organization that is committed to a process of renewal, that is committed to a process to root out corruption, that is committed to a legislative process to oversee the fact that we do something that we can call anti-corruption, but then you have these leaders, all of them, having a skeleton or two in their closets, and it's very difficult. I mean, it was exactly the same when we had our previous president, President Jacob Zuma, heading the HIV Council and the Council of Protecting Women and Children from Abuse, when you have somebody that is fatally flawed in what he did. That meant that whenever he spoke about these things, nobody really cared, because, I mean, his own lifestyle showed the opposite. And this is the problem we're having with all three of those candidates. And apart from that, I personally think Mr. Lamola is too young for this job. And regarding Mr. Machile, well, the issues of the Alex Mafia and all kinds of claims is not boding well for him in the Gauteng position. But all of them, all three of them, have strong constituencies. And what we've learned in politics, and we can look at Boris Johnson as an example in England, and we can look at Donald Trump as an example in the United States. Your supporters will forgive you for many of these issues, and then it's like a ongoing Chinese torture, because as you continue with your public life and your top position, these things just remain with you, and from time to time they present you problems, especially when integrity is needed.
Well, let's talk about the SG position then. And I want you to think about, Prof, as we're talking about, where the brush of and the taint of scandal has, kind of blighted their heels in a way, collectively over their political careers, what they might bring to the ANC. But we go to the SG position now. Fikile Mbalula, head of elections, a colourful, controversial figure in his own right. He's had some sticky situations, which I suppose we can spend a length of time talking about. You have Phumulo Masualle and Dumiseni and Ntuli. What can you share about what they are bringing to the role and what they still have to answer for?
Yeah, well, in this case, one may even add a little bit of humor to it. If Fikile Mbalula is elected in the position of G, it may just be a blessing for the country, because that means he can't serve in cabinet, which I think some people, especially those drawing cartoons, may use very, very usefully. But I think the other two, and we've seen this with Ace Magashule, what detrimental effect it had on the party if your SG has got things that he will have to account for in future at some point or other, and the administration of the party, house, because a large part of being a political party is the good administration. And if your administration falls apart due to external issues, such as corruption or allegations of corruption, then the party as a whole is having trouble. And I'm worried. I know Fikile Mbalula is being brought in for work he has done earlier in the Youth League and things like that. I know the candidate from KwaZulu-Natal is brought in to provide KZN a bite at the apple, because you'll remember after Nasrec 2017, there were no representatives from KZN in the top 6. That has now turned into the top 7. And I think the other SG candidate brings in elements of the Eastern Cape, which is traditionally as important, because your top 6, apart from what they carry with them, is a matrix of interests in the party, and it's a very sensitive mix of who is in and who is out and who can work with whom. And very often these issues that are following them, it makes them vulnerable to doing their job, because they will have to look over their shoulders all the time to see what's coming and what's going.
Well, Prof, we've got to orient ourselves now to saying the top 7, haven't we? Let's talk about the first and second DSG, Nomvula Mokonyane, Tina Jumat-Peterson, and then you also have Maripeni Ramakgopa and Ronaldo Nalumango. In, of course, Mokonyane's case, the word Bosasa comes up. Tina Jumat-Peterson, we're going to talk about the controversial sale of South Africa's strategic oil reserves. When it comes to Ramakgopa, I'd like to hear, your thoughts on what she's brought into the position and the past, and Ronaldo Nalumango as well.
Well, the last one, I'm not so sure, but with Nomvula, it's not only Bosasa. We can also add the Giyani water project that has failed, because very often these things, such as the Guyana water project, she was the political office bearer of that department. In other words, the political head. And things went very wrong in that project to the detriment of the people in that part of Limpopo. And that is over and above the allegations in the Bosasa story when she was premier of Gauteng. Ramaphosa again is the albatross around her neck is still the issue of life Isidimeni and all those issues that are not yet resolved. And in my view, if I look at where those cases are going, somebody political will have to answer, because it's not always the answer to provide or to throw an official under the bus. Some of these decisions were taken politically. And it's a tragedy, and I have a feeling, and I've got a lot of sympathy for people in the civil service that has to do the work, and very often of political decisions that was taken in bad faith, and that reflects on them afterwards.
Time and the clock are always our enemy, Prof, but I want to obviously just mention National Chair Stan Matabata, Gwede Mantashe, Amos Masondo, but go straight to what's developed just in the last half an hour or so with Mzwandile Masina effectively handing, well, his baton of support to Pule Mabe, who remains in contention for the TG position. Trouble is, it looks like those votes that would have gone Mzwandile Masina's way would be sacrificed and wasted, because this announcement was made of course, after that voting was in play.
Yeah, that's a very. I thought those kind of moves would have been made earlier on, and we're not sure horse trading were behind the scenes. It may still have an impact, but a lesser impact. So now it's basically Bajani Chowki, an advisor to the president, that is going to challenge for the TG position with Mabe out, it's an important position, especially with the ANC having huge problems financially. So the Treasurer General position, in my view, has been given higher priority in the next 2 years, especially for the ANC going towards an election. And Mr. Pejani, whether it's true or not, we're not sure, but in the media, there's also speculation that he might have been involved in the Phala issue. Of course, there is no clarity on that yet.
All right. Thank you very much for talking to us this afternoon, Prof. Thank you for your time and your analysis.